of diabetes, or about people having a touch of diabetes. What we have very sadly learned in recent years is that neither of those is true. That while the onset of type 2 diabetes may not be as dramatic as the onset of type 1, it can be every bit as deadly. So the increase in diabetes that we have seen across the world has been almost exclusively driven by type 2 diabetes. There's been some small increase in type 1, but it really is, relatively speaking, very small. The incidence is rising rapidly, and now at least 90% of people who have diabetes have type 2. So you could say that before COVID-19, we had another pandemic. And that pandemic was not an infectious disease, it was diabetes. If you have diabetes, your concern should absolutely not be only for your glucose. You must talk to your physician about your cardiovascular risk as well. Cardiovascular risk, cardiovascular disease, includes conditions that affect your heart and your circulation, such as stroke. We'll call it CVD. It's not quite heart disease because it includes stroke as well, and you know how doctors love long medical terms. So we'll stop the complicated names and just stick with CVD. The issue we have with type 2 diabetes in particular is that because in the early stages, the symptoms are often fairly vague and can be mistaken for the stresses and strains of modern life, that all too often people do not seek help. They do not recognize that they have a problem. Yes, they're tired. Oh, I have a lot on. Oh, I'm stressed out. Yes, they are getting up at night to pass water more often. Oh, maybe it's my prostate. Maybe I just drank too much last night. Yes, they're getting a lot of boils. Oh, well, you know, I'm not looking after myself. But the problem is that all the time you are living with raised glucose, it is damaging your eyes, your kidneys, and your nerves. But most importantly, perhaps, it is damaging your heart. We know that World Diabetes Day is fast approaching on the 14th of November, so what better time to highlight the link and everything that people can do, that link between diabetes and the heart. Of course, this year, we have to think of COVID too and the risk that it poses to people who have diabetes. Even when we take into account differences between people, such as their age, their sex, their ethnicity, people with type 1 diabetes have been found to be 3.5 times more likely to die, and people with type 2 diabetes twice as likely to die compared to people who don't have diabetes, but who have all the other same risk factors. But, and there is a very big but here, all is not lost, because crucially, there is a single huge modifiable risk factor for your risks from COVID. And that single huge modifiable risk factor is actually also a modifiable risk factor for your risk from your eyes, for your kidneys, for your nerves, and indeed for your heart. And that is glucose control. Now we know that traditionally just lowering your glucose has benefited your eyes, your kidneys, your nerves dramatically if you have diabetes. But it has not done as much to benefit your heart. But things in that respect are changing. We are only now recognizing quite how close the link between type 2 diabetes and the heart is. We have gone from a stage where 70% of people with diabetes were dying from cardiovascular disease, to a stage where things have improved, but you are still well over twice as likely as the rest of the population to die from this condition. But there are things that can be done. We'll hear much more about that later, But in the meantime, let us have a think. Just to remind you, by the way, that this event will be recorded. Please do feel free to interact, however. We would love to hear from you, but if you'd like to submit a question online, of course, anonymously, we would love to hear your questions, because all of our speakers will be very happy to hear from you. Now, a few housekeeping rules, please. The audio settings, you can adjust your audio if you're having problems. You can maximize or reduce down your screen size. We recommend a side-by-side view if you can. And as I say, please use the chat to our moderator or to tech support. So you can either pose questions there to the tech support if you're having any problems, or you can pose questions in that chat. And we would love to hear from you. Otherwise, we will get very bored of answering our own questions. So after the presentations, we will be taking those questions. But for instance, if you have a question for me and it doesn't occur to you until halfway through one of our other presentations, that's fine too. At the end, we will all be available to take questions. Okay, so what are we going to be looking at today? Well, I'm here to welcome you, but after that, I will take you through a brief presentation on shared decision-making, which as a family doctor is a cause very close to my heart. We will then be examining in more detail that link between diabetes and the heart. And we are very, very privileged to have joining us for this Professor Thomas Wascher from Austria and Dr. Ricardo Fontes Carvalho from Portugal, who will take us through the medical aspects of the relationship between type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We will give you a break, and then, of course, perhaps most importantly of all, we give you the view from the patient, because this is so, so key. And we are absolutely honored to be joined by none other than Mr. Jean-Luc Aissele, who is the CEO of the World Heart Federation, to do so. After that, the opportunity for you to have some questions, and then if you would like one-to-one interviews with any of us at the end of the event, we will be delighted to hear from you. Okay, so without any further ado, I've already introduced them briefly. Mr. Jean-Luc Aissele, who will be giving our last presentation from the patient's perspective, Professor Ricardo Fontes Carvalho, and Professor Thomas Wascher. We have an international, a worldwide faculty, and we want to introduce to you cooperation with the Care for Your Heart Association, an Austrian association of healthcare professionals who are specialized in the treatment of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. And to give us a very brief introduction before his main presentation, it gives me great pleasure to ask Professor Wascher to tell you a little bit about that. Thomas.
Yes, hello everybody from Vienna in Austria. We are quite in a lockdown since midnight this night. And well, Care for Your Heart, you can see it in German at the bottom of the slide. Diabetes und Ihr Herz is an association of medical doctors that is not a scientific association, but is an association of doctors that would like to provide information for patients, for relatives of patients, just to empower patients with diabetes, with or without heart disease, to improve their interaction with the medical community, with the goal to have better patient adherence and better patient empowerment through shared decision-making in a chronic disease like diabetes. So that's what Care for Your Heart is in Austria.
Thank you so much, Professor Wascher, and I have no doubt that our delegates will be interested to hear a little bit more about it later. And of course, you will not only be giving that perspective, but in addition, you will also be available in our panel discussion to answer some questions. So I'm sure that our delegates will look forward to that. So we're going to start with a polling question, just to warm you up. I would like to know what your opinion is of this question. What percentage of type 2 diabetes patients are likely to lose their life to cardiovascular disease? Is it A, less than 15%, B, 15 to 30%, C, 30 to 50%, D, more than 50%, or who knows? All vote now, please. Okay, so I hope you've all answered, and very unusually, I'm not going to give you the answer. And the reason that I'm not going to give you the answer is because I would like to introduce you to a short animation, and you will find the answer in there if you listen carefully. So, if we could have that animation. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be back with you shortly.
Living with type 2 diabetes, there are a few things you need to be thinking about in your daily life. Most of these are common knowledge and are always important, like eating healthily, exercising, not smoking, maintaining a healthy body weight, and checking your blood sugar levels. But there's one thing you might be forgetting. That's your heart. Did you know that over half of people with type 2 diabetes lose their life to cardiovascular disease? It's true. Why is this, you ask? Well, with type 2 diabetes, your blood sugar levels are higher. Constant high blood sugar levels increase the rate of plaque buildup in the walls of the artery. This can make the arteries more narrow, which decreases blood flow to the rest of the body. Sometimes even blood clots are created, which can cut off blood circulation. That's why taking good care of your heart is extremely important. So, make sure you speak to your doctor. Ask if your heart is being looked after and what more you can do to protect it. Take action. Act for your heart today.
Okay. Oh, we seem to have lost the screen. There we go. So we are back to shared decision making. I think some really quite scary results there. And what we saw, is that okay? 51% of you thought that it was more than 50%, and 38% of you thought that it was between 30 and 50%. I'm delighted to see that none of you didn't know. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let us have a little think then about what shared decision making is. From my perspective, this has been something that I have been working at with my trainees for some time, because as I remind them all the time, and unfortunately some of them come from hospital, and then perhaps they're not quite so aware of the importance of a partnership with their patients. I think this is something not taught perhaps quite so much, certainly in the United Kingdom, in secondary care, in hospitals as in primary care. So it is all about being in partnership with your patients. This is a sponsored symposium, but nobody can make me say anything I don't want to. So, why is shared decision-making so important? Unfortunately, many people, within a year, more than half of people with diabetes have stopped taking their medication regularly. And a similar proportion, about half of people who are taking statins either because they've had a heart attack or because they have raised cholesterol or because they have diabetes and are at high risk of heart attack or stroke, are not taking their statins. And an almost equal number are not taking blood pressure medications. Now, the problem we have is that we know that statins reduce heart attacks. We know that blood pressure lowering drugs, if your blood pressure is high, reduce strokes and heart attacks. We know that diabetes, good diabetes control, reduces complications. So what is it that means that people are less likely to take their medication? It's so important that we recognize that there are many reasons, that people are not patients, they're not diabetics, they are people with diabetes. There are people at risk of heart disease. And that means that they are people with different lives and different priorities. And everybody's priorities are different. In some cases, people don't mean not to take their medication. They forget, they have other things on their mind, they're worried about COVID, they don't recognize how important it is, it doesn't make them feel any better, so Yeah, it's hard to remember when you don't feel any better and maybe you get side effects, or you read the patient information leaflet and it tells you that you could have muscle pains or low blood pressure or problems in the bedroom. I don't want to do that. Sometimes people make a deliberate choice not to take it, either because they're worried about the side effects. And that is not remotely surprising because, of course, if you read the patient leaflet, the patient information leaflet, then you will get every side effect that anybody has ever had, basically. But of course, really importantly, side effects happen now, whereas benefits are reflected by nothing happening. Benefits are reflected by the fact that you don't have a heart attack in 10 years' time. Well, if you don't have it, you don't know you would have had it otherwise. So these benefits are often very nebulous, and it's difficult to remain motivated when you have something which is intangible, where you don't recognize it as a real benefit in the here and now. We are all much better in the here and now than we are in the distant future. These, interestingly, is a study looking at the barriers to people taking their medication, why most commonly people didn't take it. Firstly, most commonly, I felt great. I don't want to be a patient. I want to live my life. I want to be a person. So I decided not to take my medication because I felt fine. Or I felt fine and I forgot because you know what? I've got a life. I have a job. I have children. I have COVID to worry about. I have lockdown. I have to stockpile. I have to do all those things. I have to adjust my timings. So many things that people have to do. And then I just got tied up. I was absorbed. I forgot. Before I knew it, it was too late to take it. I'll take it tomorrow. So many reasons, and so understandable. Now, in the past, when I trained as a doctor, this is what I was taught. The patient comes to you with their symptoms. You ask them questions because you are the doctor. You are the specialist. You are the expert. You will examine them. You will investigate them because that's your decision. You will make the diagnosis because you will be an expert. Once you've qualified as a doctor, you will prescribe. Then your patient will take it. Of course they'll take it. Why wouldn't they? That will make them get better because the medicine we give always makes people get better and it never has side effects. And then you can stop the medicine because when I qualified, it was so long ago that there was hardly any preventive medicine. And of course, that's what the patient thought of when they thought of their doctor. It's not quite like that anymore, huh? In fact, do you know what? It wasn't like that then. Today, however, the internet has made everybody an expert. And the problem we have is that the balance of power perhaps has shifted. Certainly in the United Kingdom, we have had a lot of people criticizing the government for their approach, but saying, you kept telling us you were listening to the science. Maybe the science was wrong. So people question in a way they never have before. People are human. And having a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, especially if you say, right, you've got to do something about it because otherwise your leg's going to drop off, you're going to have a heart attack, you're going to lose your eyesight, you're going to go blind, you're going to be on injections. That's really scary. And actually scare tactics really do not work. And yet, as medical students, we are taught the scary facts. We are taught that we have to put across those facts to our patients. So it's not surprising that many young doctors will start off, as they mean to continue, by telling people the scary facts. Because it makes sense to you as a doctor that everybody would want to avoid that, right? Yeah, not necessarily. Because actually, having a diagnosis of diabetes is very often like a bereavement. You have had your healthy you taken away. So you go through those stages of diabetes, of bereavement. Denial. Nah, I'll be all right. It won't happen to me. They're just trying to scare me. Anger. Why me? It's not fair. Depression. That's it. It's all over. And then finally, perhaps, acceptance. But different people spend different lengths of time at these different stages. We know that people who have long-term medical conditions are more likely to suffer with depression than other people. And we know that much of that is down to the stress of living with the long-term condition. It's not just that they feel unwell, it's the knowledge of what it could do. We also know that unfortunately, depression is closely linked with not looking after yourself properly. You may have low self-esteem, you may have lack of motivation. So what can we do? Really importantly, we can make the most of the time that we have with our patients. On average, we spend 3 hours a year with patients. So the average person with type 2 diabetes will have about a total of about 3 hours with a healthcare professional. That's every healthcare professional put together. So 15 minutes with me every 3 months, another half hour with the nurse every 6 months, or 10 minutes with the nurse every 6 months, half an hour with the dietitian twice a year. It's not very much, because that means that they have to absorb enough motivation from those 3 hours to carry them through 8,757 hours. So, how do we approach it? How do we work with our patient? What does work? If scare tactics don't work, what does? Well, this is what we used to do. I'm the expert, I'm the doctor, I'm the one with the degree, I will decide what's best for you and you will do it because you know that I want what's best for you. It doesn't work. Then there's the so-called clinician as best agent decision-making. I'm the expert, but I do recognize that you have maybe a little part to play here. Yeah, you're the one who has to take the tablets. So, okay, I will ask you what's important to you. And this really only started happening about 20, 25 perhaps years ago. But of course, when it comes down to it, I can't trust you to take the final decision. So I'll make the decision, but I will take what you say into account. But the final decision is the judge's. There is no court of appeal. Then there's informed decision-making. And this is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. The clinician says, I don't have to take the tablets. I don't have to put up with the side effects. I don't have to put up the complications if I don't take them. So you know what? It's your life. It's your tablets. I'll explain to you the risks and the benefits. Then it's over to you. Then you make the decision. You decide which one you want me to prescribe and I'll do it. Now that's a lot better than the parental model, but that's an awful lot of pressure to put on somebody. Why can't we be partners? And of course, that's what shared decision-making is. Shared decision-making is about being in partnership every step of the way. We are a team from the moment you walk into that consulting room and I shake your hand. Or in the days of COVID, from the moment we both get onto that video call. Let's work out between us what matters to you. I will not judge. It's not my place to judge. But in return, you will be honest. That's a partnership. Help me to help you. Help me to help you by helping me to understand what matters to you. And let me help you understand why it's important to me that we do control this. Then, when we've done that, at that stage, I can take you through the options and we can put it into perspective from your concerns. I will then be in a position where I can see it with your eyes. And at that point, we will both be making an informed decision. And then, that way, we can work out together which medicine is best. Sounds easy, huh? Easier said than done. It takes a lot of work, a lot of practice. I've been training other GPs for 27 years, and some of them pick it up a lot quicker than others. So what do we need to do? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to stop scaring people. The last thing somebody who is coming to terms with their diagnosis or who already feels bad because they know they're going to get a lecture, who doesn't want to come and see you in the first place because you're just going to tell them they put on weight and you're going to look disappointed. Then they walk in and what do they get? Oh, did you know you're much more likely to have an amputation? You have to do something about it. 15 times more likely to have an amputation. That means it could be you next, 24 every day in the United Kingdom alone. We have got to help our patients to work out what their priorities are. Once we've done that, they will know, because often they don't. It's amazing to me how sometimes when you talk to somebody, they'll go, oh, yeah, there is something that really matters actually. You know, I don't care about myself. I'm depressed. I have no self-esteem. I don't think I'm worth saving. I just, you know, I want to eat because I'm hungry. And why should I worry about my health because I'm worthless? But actually what I do want, I want to be there to walk my daughter down the aisle. I want to be there to play with my grandchildren. I want to be there for them. Then we are on the same page. We must work out the mental and the physical health together, the psychology and the results. And that will allow all of us to approach shared decision-making with confidence. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it from me for my introduction. There are as yet no questions. And so it gives me enormous pleasure to move on to the next stage of our presentation. That is where I am coming from. But, as I've already said, I'm not the person who matters. It's that person in the other chair, the person who goes out and has the other 8,575, well, 757 hours a year living with their condition. It's the person with the condition, the patient. So let's hear from them with a brief video, and then we're going to hear directly about their experience of living with this condition. We know every patient's journey is unique. We know that their story represents the kind of experience that patients have when they're given a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. And we hope it will really give you a flavor of how it feels to live with this condition.
Mein Name ist Elke Heck, ich wohne in Alzey und bin 68 Jahre alt. Ich bin verheiratet, habe eine Tochter und 2 Enkelsöhne. Meine Freizeit verbringe ich mit meiner Familie. Ich fühle mich sehr wohl, dass ich noch ehrenamtliche Arbeit leisten kann. Das macht mir Spaß. 1973 wurde bei mir Diabetes Typ 2 festgestellt. Wer Diabetes hat, kann auch eher einen Herzinfarkt bekommen. Und das hat dann mich getroffen. 2014 hatte ich einen Termin bei einem Kardiologen. Der stellte dann einen Herzinfarkt bei mir fest, worauf ich in dieser Nacht noch operiert werden musste. Da war ich sehr erschrocken. Als ich das erfahren habe mit meinem Diabetes, das ist mir sehr, sehr schwer gefallen. Ich achte wesentlich mehr auf meine Gesundheit als vorher. Man kann mit dem Diabetes leben, aber irgendwelche Sachen muss man verändern. Es geht nicht anders. Blutdruck ist das Wichtigste, keine anstrengenden Arbeiten zu haben. Von meinem Diabetologen habe ich nahegelegt bekommen, dass ich mein Gewicht reduzieren sollte, was ich auch getan habe. Und deswegen geht es mir jetzt wesentlich besser. Ich bin sehr glücklich wieder. Also ich gebe den Leuten, die mich fragen, grundsätzlich den Rat, sie sollten zu einem Diabetologen gehen, der auch nach dem Herz schaut. Meinen Optimismus habe ich aus meiner Familie mitgebracht. Das habe ich auch zum Glück nicht verlernt, trotz aller Krankheiten, die ich habe. Und gehe sehr gern nach draußen. Wenn ich an mein Herz denke, hoffe ich, dass ich noch lange mit ihm leben kann.